Okay, here we have take 3. I will also say that today is the day I'm supposed to get a new computer in the mail, and I hope that that means a little bit more reliability and fewer technical difficulties, but we'll find out. Okay, so the story that I had wanted to share on Friday and an hour ago is by a writer that I really like named Isaac Asimov. And traditionally, I have always read this story on the first week of school. And it's another story that was not written like now. This is written, I don't know, I would guess like the 40s and 50s. So as you're listening to the story, you can hear all of these little clues on the way that people talk and kind of the technology that they use. And some of the vocabulary lets you know, like, oh, this is not a story from like 2020. Okay, so the story is called Rain, Rain, Go Away. There she is again, said Lillian Wright as she adjusted the Venetian's line carefully. There she is, George. There who is? Asked her husband, trying to get satisfactory contrast on the TV so that he might settle down to the ball game. And just a side note, this is what I mean about technology. It used to be that if you wanted to watch TV, you would have like little bunny ears on top of it. And sometimes you would have to adjust the antenna in order to get the screen to work. Mrs. Saccaro, she said, and then to forestall her husband's inevitable, who's that? Added hastily, oh, the new neighbors, for heaven's sake. Oh, sunbathing, always sunbathing. I wonder where her boy is. He's usually out on a nice day like this, standing in that tremendous yard of theirs and throwing the ball against the house. Did you ever see him, George? Oh, I've heard him. It's a version of water torture. Bang on the wall, biff on the ground, smack in the hand, bang, biff, smack, bang, biff. Oh, he's a nice boy, quiet and well-behaved. I wish Tommy would make friends with him. He's the right age, too. Just about 10, I should say. Well, I didn't know Tommy was backward about making friends. Well, it's hard with the Saccaros. They keep so to themselves. I don't even know what Mr. Saccaro does. Why should you? It's not really anybody's business what he does. Well, it's odd that I never see him go to work. No one ever sees me go to work. You stay at home and write. What does he do? I dare say that Mrs. Saccaro knows what Mr. Saccaro does and is all upset because she doesn't know what I do. Oh, I see Tess. Hi, Tess. Oh, George. Lillian retreated from the window and glanced with distaste at the television. Shondine's was at bat. I think we should make an effort. The neighborhood should. And I just want to pause a little second to point out, first of all, when it says like bang, biff, that's what we call onomatopoeia, because those are all words that the word itself describes the sound that it's making. So when you say bang, it makes a banging sound, right? So that's onomatopoeia. The other thing I want to point out is that this is one of the ways you can know this is a little bit old-timey, is that Mrs. Wright, who's looking through her window blinds, she can tell that the neighbors, that she can't tell what the husband does in this couple, but she doesn't even think or ask what the wife does because it wasn't common for women to work and get paid outside of the home. What kind of effort? George was comfortable on the couch now, with the king-size soda in his hand, freshly opened and frosted with moisture. To get to know them. Well, didn't you when she just moved in? You said you called. Well, I said hello, but, well, she just moved in and the house was still upset, so that's all it could be, just hello. It's been 2 months now, and it's still nothing more than hello. So she's so odd. Is she? Well, she's always looking up at the sky. I've seen her do it 100 times, and she's never been out when it's the least bit cloudy. Once, when the boy was out playing, she called to him to come in, shouting that it was going to rain. I happened to hear her, and I thought, oh, no, wouldn't you know, and me with wash on the line. So I hurried out, and it was broad sunlight. Oh, there were some clouds, but nothing really. Well, did it rain eventually? Of course not. I just had to run out in the yard for nothing. George was lost amid a couple of base hits and the most embarrassing bobble that meant a run. When the excitement was over and the pitcher was trying to regain his composure, George called out to Lillian, who was vanishing into the kitchen. Well, since they're from Arizona, I dare say they don't know rain clouds from any other kind. Lillian came back into the living room with a patter of high heels. From where? Well, from Arizona, according to Tommy. How did Tommy know? He talked to their boy in between ball checks, I guess, and he told Tommy they came from Arizona, and then the boy was called in. At least Tommy says it might have been Arizona or maybe Alabama, someplace like that. You know Tommy and his non-total recall. But if they're that nervous about the weather, I guess it's Arizona, and they don't know what to make of a good rainy climate like ours. This is not meant to be funny in this story, but I find this very funny. Another old-timey detail, listen to this sentence when it says that Lillian, the patter of high heels. I mean, here is this couple, and it's a Saturday. He's watching baseball, and she's wearing high heels in her house to relax. I do not wear high heels when I am relaxing in my house. And if you have a grown lady at your house, I bet she also does not wear high heels just to hang out. They hurt. They're uncomfortable. So here's Mrs. Wright again. Well, why didn't you ever tell me? Because Tommy only told me this morning because I thought he must have told you already. And to tell the absolute truth, because I thought you could just manage to drag out a normal existence, even if you never found out. Wow! The ball went sailing into the right field stands, and that was that for the pitcher. Lillian went back to the Venetian blinds and said, I'll simply just have to make her acquaintance. She looks very nice. Oh, look at that, George. George was looking at nothing but the TV. Lillian said, I know she's staring at that cloud, and now she'll be going in, honestly. George was out 2 days later on a reference search in the library and came home with a load of books. Lillian greeted him jubilantly. She said, now, you're not doing anything tomorrow. Well, that sounds like a statement, not a question. It is a statement. We're going out with the Saccharos to Murphy's Park with the next door neighbors, George. How can you never remember the name? I'm gifted. How did it happen? I just went up to their house this morning and rang the bell. That easy? It wasn't easy. It was hard. I stood there jittering with my finger on the doorbell till I thought that ringing the bell would be easier than having the door open and being caught standing there like a fool. And she didn't kick you out? No, she was as sweet as she could be. She invited me in, knew who I was, said she was so glad I had come to visit, you know. And you suggested we go to Murphy's Park. Yes, I thought if I suggested something that would let the children have fun, it would be easier for her to go along with it. She wouldn't want to spoil a chance for her boy. A mother's psychology. But you should see her home. Ugh, you had a reason for all this. It all comes out. You wanted the cook's tour. But please spare me the color scheme detailed. I'm not interested in the bedspreads, and the size of the closets is a topic with which I can dispense. It was the secret of their happy marriage that Lillian paid no attention to George. She went into the color scheme details and was most meticulous about the bedspreads and gave him an inch-by-inch description of closet size. And clean! I have never seen any place so spotless. If you get to know her then, she'll be setting you impossible standards and you'll have to drop her in self-defense. Her kitchen, said Lillian, ignoring him, was so spanking clean. You just couldn't believe she ever used it. I asked for a drink of water, and she held the glass underneath the tap and poured slowly so that not one drop fell in the sink itself. It wasn't affectation. She did it so casually that I just knew she always did it that way. And when she gave me the glass, she held it with a clean napkin, just hospital sanitary. Now she must be a lot of trouble to herself. Did she agree to come with us right off? Well, not right off. She called to her husband about what the weather forecast was, and he said that the newspapers all said it would be fair tomorrow and he was waiting for the latest report on the radio. All the newspapers said, hey? Of course, they'd all just print the official weather forecast, so they would all agree. But I think they do subscribe to all the newspapers. At least I've watched the bundle the newsboy leaves. There isn't much you miss, is there? Anyway, said Lillian severely, she called up the Weather Bureau and had them tell her the latest. And she called it out to her husband, and they said they'd go, except they'd phone us right away if there were any unexpected changes in the weather. All right, then we'll go. All right. So what we know so far in the story is that there's Lillian and George Wright. George is kind of dismissive of his wife, but he likes baseball. Lillian is a little bit nosy. She's a little bit nosy, and she's very curious about these neighbors next door. And the neighbors are called the Saccharos, and we know that they have a son. We know that they just moved there. They're from out of town. And we know they're just very, very interested in the weather. And also their house is really clean. Like, you know, Mrs. Saccharo is really careful to give like a napkin handed around a glass before she handed it over. And that business about checking the newspaper before the internet, the way that you would find out the weather every day is two ways. You could see it printed on the newspaper and it would tell you the official weather report, or you could call a phone number and it would tell you what time it was and the temperature. You could call time and temperature. I used to do it every day when I was growing up. Okay, so now they're going to go to like a carnival, like a theme park. The Saccharos were young and pleasant, dark and handsome. In fact, as they came down the long walk from her home to where the Wright automobile was parked, George leaned toward his wife and breathed into her ear. Oh, he's the reason. I wish he were, said Lillian. Is that a handbag he's carrying? Pocket radio. To listen to weather forecasts, I bet. The Saccharo boy came running after them, waving something which turned out to be an aneroid barometer. And all three got into the back seat. And y'all, a barometer, it's an instrument that measures air pressure, and meteorologists use it. It's an instrument so you can tell what the weather is going to be. All three got into the back seat. Conversation was turned on and lasted with a neat give and take on impersonal subjects to Murphy's Park. The Saccharo boy was so polite and reasonable, even Tommy Wright, wedged between his parents in the front seat, was subdued by example into a semblance of civilization. Lillian could not recall when she had spent so serenely pleasant a drive. She was not the least disturbed by the fact that, barely to be heard under the flow of the conversation, Mr. Saccharo's small radio was on. She never actually saw him put it occasionally to his ear. It was a beautiful day at Murphy's Park, hot and dry without being too hot, with a cheerfully bright sun and a blue, blue sky. Even Mr. Saccharo, though he inspected every quarter of the heavens with a careful eye and then stared piercingly at the barometer, seemed to have no fault to find. Lillian ushered the two boys to the amusement section and bought enough tickets to allow one ride for each on every variety of centrifugal thrill the park offered. Please, she said to a protesting Mrs. Saccharo, let this be my treat. I'll let you have your turn next time. When she returned, George was gone. Where? She began. Just down there at the refreshment stand. I told them I'd wait for you, and we would join them. He sounded gloomy. Anything wrong? No, not really, except I think he must be independently wealthy. What? I don't know what he does for a living. I hinted. Oh, now who's curious? I was doing it for you. He said he's just a student of human nature. How philosophical. That would explain all those newspapers. Yes, but with a handsome, wealthy man next door, it looks as though I'll have impossible standards set for me too. Don't be silly. And he doesn't come from Arizona. He doesn't? I said I heard he was from Arizona, and he looked so surprised. It was obvious he didn't. Then he laughed and asked if he had an Arizona accent. Lillian said thoughtfully, "Well, he has some kind of accent, you know. There are lots of Spanish ancestry people in the Southwest, so he could be from Arizona. Sakuro could be a Spanish name. Sounds Japanese to me. Come, they're waving. Oh, look what they bought." The Saccharos were each holding 3 sticks of cotton candy, huge swirls of pink foam consisting of threads of sugar dried out of frothy syrup that had been whipped about in a warm vessel and melted sweetly in the mouth and left one feeling sticky. The Saccharos held one out to each right, and out of politeness, the rights accepted. They went down the midway, tried their hands at darts, at the kind of poker game where balls are rolled into holes, at knocking wooden cylinders off pedestals. They took pictures of themselves and recorded their voices and tested the strength of their hand grips. Eventually, they collected the youngsters who had been reduced to a satisfactorily breathless state of roiled up insides, and the Saccharos ushered theirs off instantly to the refreshment stand. Tommy hinted the extent of his pleasure at the possible purchase of a hot dog, and George tossed him a quarter. He ran off too. "Frankly," said George, "I prefer to stay here. If I see them biting away at another cotton candy stick, I'll turn green and sicken on the spot. If they hadn't had a dozen apiece, I'll eat a dozen myself." "I know. And they're buying a handful for the child now. I offered to Stan Saccaro a hamburger, and he just looked grim and shook his head. Not that a hamburger is much, but after enough cotton candy, it ought to be a feast." "I know. I offered her an orange drink, and the way she jumped when she said no, you'd think I'd thrown it in her face. Still, I suppose they've never been to a place like this before, and they need time to adjust to the novelty. They'll fill up on cotton candy and never eat it again for 10 years. Well, maybe they stroll towards the Saccharos. "You know, Lil, it's clouding up." All 3 Saccharos were upon him, polite but insistent. They were sorry. They'd had a wonderful time, a marvelous time. The Wrights would have to be their guests as soon as it could be managed. But now, really, they had to go home. It looked stormy. Mrs. Saccaro wails that all the forecasts had been for fair weather. George tried to console them. It's hard to predict a local thunderstorm, but even if it were to come, and it mightn't, it wouldn't last more than half an hour on the outside. At which comment, the Saccaro youngster seemed on the verge of tears, and Mrs. Saccaro's hand, holding a handkerchief, trembled visibly. "Let's go home," said George in resignation. The drive back seemed to stretch interminably. There was no conversation to speak of. Mr. Saccharo's radio was quite loud now as he switched from station to station, catching a weather report every time. They were mentioning local thunder showers now. The Saccaro youngster piped up that the barometer was falling, and Mrs. Saccaro, chin in the palm of her hand, stared dolefully at the sky and asked if George could not drive faster, please. "It does look rather threatening, doesn't it?" said Lillian in a polite attempt to share their guest's attitude. But then George heard her mutter, "Honestly," under her breath. A wind had sprung up, driving the dust of the week's dry road before it. When they entered the street on which they lived, the leaves rustled ominously. Lightning flickered. George said, "You'll be indoors in 2 minutes, friends. We'll make it." He pulled up at the gate that opened onto the Saccharo's spacious front yard and got out of the car to open the back door. He thought he felt a drop. They were just in time. The Saccharos tumbled out, faces drawn with tension, muttering thanks, and started off towards their long front walk at a dead run. "Honestly," said Lillian, "you'd think they were." The heavens opened up, and the rain came down in giant drops as though some celestial dam had suddenly burst. The top of their car was pounded with 100 drumsticks, and halfway to their door, the Stackrose stopped and looked despairingly upwards. Their faces blurred as the rain hit, blurred and shrank and ran together. All three shriveled, collapsing within their clothes, which sank down into 3 sticky wet heaps. And while the right sat there, transfixed with horror, Lillian found herself unable to stop the completion of her remark. Made of sugar and afraid they would melt. So guess what? That's the end of the story. The end of the story is that the Sakharov family, who were all freaked out about the rain and weather, and they're from out of town, they turn out to be people who were made of sugar, and then they melted. So what do you think of that? That's kind of a strange story, huh? That's because Isaac Asimov, he's a famous science fiction writer. So there's hints all throughout the story. For instance, the word, like the name Sakharov, it comes from the same root as saccharin, like sugar. So their names are like Mr. and Mrs. Sugar. And then when it says that Mrs. Sakharov doesn't like there to be any moisture on the outside of the glass because she doesn't like water. And then, it's a little strange to have an aneroid barometer that you carry around with you. But also when they're at the park and they eat so much cotton candy. Like if you've ever had cotton candy, like one cotton candy thing, that's a lot. But like that much, and the way that they got like almost emotional, like crying, coming back, those are all hints that like there's something real strange here. So anyway, I hope that you liked that story. It was, like I said, it's one of my favorites. Tomorrow, I think we're going to try something a little lighter and do an O. Henry story. One day this week, I'm probably going to have to do another garden one because the stuff in the garden is getting huge. All right. Okay. Tess and everybody, I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.